We're about to begin a brand new love journey. New York, 5:37 p.m. rush hour. The time when every street turns into a chaotic symphony of honking cars, hurried footsteps, and neon lights beginning to shimmer like silver scales over the river of night. Ava Collins, 26, had just finished her evening shift at the small cafe on 47th Street. She took off her apron, waved goodbye to her boss, and stepped onto the sidewalk with her usual smile. A long day was over, and all she wanted was to go home, take a warm shower, and write a few more lines in her notebook about her dream. To open a center for orphans and single mothers, just like her own mom once was. But life always loves to tease those who make plans. A sudden scream tore through the crowd. "Pickpocket! Someone stole my purse." Ava spun around. An old woman was collapsing, trembling as she pointed toward a man in a gray jacket sprinting through the crowd. Without thinking, Ava tossed her bag aside, rolled up her sleeves, and ran. "Hey, stop!" she shouted, sneakers slapping against the rain-slick pavement. The man glanced back, smirked, and vanished into the crowd. Ava clenched her teeth and pushed through the throng, ignoring someone yelling, "Are you crazy?" Her heart pounded from a mix of adrenaline and an unexplainable burst of recklessness. Then she spotted the gray jacket ducking into an alley beside a high-rise. Without thinking twice, she charged forward, leapt onto his back, and clung to him like a furious cat. "Baby! Trying to run from me?" she yelled, half angry, half triumphant. But the man spun around so fast that she lost her balance. Both of them crashed to the pavement in a move any action director would envy. The only sounds left were their heavy breaths and Ava's wildly beating heart. The man beneath her wasn't the thief. He was tall, dressed in a white shirt under a gray coat, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. His face looked carved from stone, his eyes a stormy gray, cold, metallic, and impossibly sharp. They stared at each other for several endless seconds. Then he tilted his head slightly, his deep, husky voice cutting through the hum of the street. "If that's how you flirt with men, I'll admit, I'm impressed." Ava froze. She was sitting on him, literally, one knee pressed against his abdomen, her hand still gripping his collar. Her hair had come undone, a few strands falling onto his face, making the whole image dangerously intimate. "Oh my God!" she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "I thought you were the thief." He sat up slowly, brushing dust off his sleeve, eyes fixed on her as if studying some rare creature. "Next time, I hope you'll check before you attack." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Jump on a man in the middle of the street?" "Don't worry, no one's going to believe I was assaulted." His tone was dry yet warm, laced with a quiet current of amusement that made the air hum. Ava bit her lip, bowed her head, and hurried away, her heart still racing. She heard him call after her, voice carrying a hint of rare intrigue. "My name's Damian Blackwood. In case you ever plan to apologize properly or attack again." She didn't look back, but her face was burning like a warning light. Damian stood there, watching the small figure disappear into the crowd, her brown hair fluttering in the evening wind. For the first time in years, he felt his mouth curve upward, a reflex he'd almost forgotten. He didn't know why. Maybe it was her eyes, awkward yet fearless. Maybe it was her voice, somehow warm and alive amid Manhattan's icy chaos. When the black Bentley pulled up, his assistant Lucas stepped out, holding a phone. "Mr. Blackwood, the meeting with the investment board has..." "Cancel it." "Sir, I was attacked." "Attacked?" Lucas went pale. "Yes, by a girl, who called me baby." He climbed into the car, eyes still fixed on the busy street. Inside him flickered something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Something like a tiny ember, slipping past the armor he'd built since the day his ex-fiancée left him for someone else. As for Ava, by the time she reached her small fifth-floor apartment in Brooklyn, she was still shaken. She dropped her bag on the couch, grabbed her head, and muttered to herself, "Brilliant, Ava. You just attacked a man in public and called him baby. Perfect. Maybe you'll make the news tomorrow." Her phone buzzed. It was her mom. "Home yet?" "It's cold tonight." "Yes, Mom. I'm home, just had a weird day." "Weird good or weird bad?" "Both, I guess." She leaned back on the couch, eyes landing on a magazine on the table, the cover showing a familiar face. Damian Blackwood, the Iron CEO of Manhattan's real estate empire. Her blood ran cold. The glass in her hand almost slipped. Oh God, no way! The man she'd just jumped on in the middle of the street, the one she'd called Baby, was none other than the most feared billionaire in New York City. And Ava Collins, the girl who dreamed of kindness and small miracles, had just made the heart of that cold man tremble, all because of one ridiculous fall. The next morning, the city was still veiled in mist, skyscrapers reflecting the pale chill of dawn. Ava stood before Blackwood Group, the towering building with a silver logo carved into glass, gleaming like the emblem of absolute power. She took a deep breath. Stepping onto those marble stairs felt like stepping into another world. This job paid 3 times more than her previous one, a chance to save enough to someday build the center for orphans and single mothers she'd always dreamed of. The only problem? She'd just tackled the CEO of this very company in the middle of the street last night. Ava muttered to herself, adjusting her hair. There's no way he remembers. New York has 8 million people. I'm just one of them. And he fell. He probably didn't even see my face clearly. She took another deep breath and stepped into the elevator with the most professional smile she'd practiced all night. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, she had no idea she was walking straight into fate. The conference room was bright and spacious. Dozens of people in suits stood in neat rows. At the head of the table, Damian Blackwood was signing documents. He looked up at the sound of the door. Those storm-gray eyes met hers for just 1 second. But Ava felt all the air sucked out of the room. Her heart stopped. And him, he raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Well, well, the street attacker. Welcome back. A faint what escaped someone at the far end of the table. No one dared to breathe. Ava froze, cold sweat trickling down her neck. Mr. Blackwood, she stammered. Ah, so you do know my name, he said smoothly, his voice deep and metallic. Congratulations. I remember you quite well, too. She tried to stay composed. I'm so sorry about last night. I thought you were a thief, he finished for her, his eyes glinting with amusement. That's a new compliment. I've never been mistaken for someone that quick on his feet. The entire room went still. No one even dared to chuckle. Ava silently prayed for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. I'll leave right now, she whispered, turning toward the door. No need, his calm voice stopped her. You're hired. She blinked. What? He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs, his gaze sharp enough to pin her in place. Miss Collins. I like people who take action. A faint smile curved his lips. And I also need someone bold enough to silence an entire boardroom just by walking in. Ava gaped at him. You're serious? I rarely joke. Lucas, Damian's assistant, cleared his throat, desperately trying to diffuse the tension. Miss Collins will start her probation tomorrow morning. Correct, Mr. Blackwood? Right now, Damian replied curtly. I don't like waiting. 3 hours later, Ava still hadn't recovered. Her desk was right outside the CEO's glass-walled office, where the frosted letters DB shimmered every time someone passed by. Other employees stole discreet, or not so discreet, glances at her. She tried to focus, typing as if her life depended on every keystroke. The office door opened behind her. Damian stepped out. He wore a charcoal suit and a black tie, walking with the kind of measured precision that made even air feel obedient. Stopping beside her, he said quietly, My coffee, Miss Collins. I haven't been instructed yet. Consider this your instruction. Ava took a steadying breath and stood up. How do you take it? Black, no sugar, no milk. Matches your personality, she muttered, then instantly regretted it. Damian paused, tilting his head slightly toward her. And you, he said slowly, are the opposite, sweet. Distractingly so. Ava froze, her cheeks flushing scarlet. He turned away, his voice low and commanding. 10 minutes, or I'll find someone else. When he returned to his desk, the coffee was already there. On the rim of the cup, a small sticky note was attached, written in neat, careful handwriting. No sugar, but a little bit of courage. Damian stared at the note, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward. A rare smile that made Lucas, who had just entered, nearly drop the folder in his hands. Mr. Blackwood, did you just... I didn't say anything, Damien cut him off coolly, though his voice was lower than usual, as if hiding something. As he took the first sip, the bitterness spread across his tongue, but the aroma was oddly captivating, enough to make him pause his pen. For the first time in years, Damien Blackwood's mind wasn't on investment reports. It was on a pair of lively brown eyes, belonging to the girl who dared to tackle him in the street. As for Ava, when she stepped into the elevator at the end of the day, her shoulders slumped and her heart was still pounding. She told herself, 60 days of probation, Ava. 60 days, no mistakes, no more baby. Got it? The doors began to close when a familiar, deep voice called from behind. Miss Collins. She turned, startled. He stood there, one hand in his pocket, the hallway lights glinting in his eyes like glass. Don't run too fast in the hall, he said casually. I wouldn't want to fall a second time. Ava could only gape, while Damien's half-smile appeared again, sharp as a blade, yet somehow disarming. A smile that told her the storm had only just begun. Damien Blackwood had always been described as a machine built to rule. At 34, he owned more than half a dozen skyscrapers across Manhattan. His stocks moved markets, and every decision he made could either save or destroy hundreds of jobs. He didn't love. He didn't laugh. He wasn't passionate about anything except numbers. Since the day his fiancée left him for a rival, 5 years ago, Damien's heart had turned into a desert. He didn't believe in love anymore. He believed only in contracts, clauses, and signatures. Until she walked in, Ava Collins, clumsy, talkative, sometimes rambling as if her mind were a half-written novel. But there was something about her he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the way she smiled at everyone, even those who didn't smile back. Or the way she handed him coffee with a note that read, no sugar, but a little bit of courage. She didn't know that her innocence was slowly melting a heart that had been frozen for years. Tuesday morning, Blackwood Group was as silent and orderly as ever. Damien was reading a financial report when a soft knock sounded on the door. Come in. Ava peeked in, smiling brightly. I brought the updated contracts for you. Leave them on the desk. He didn't look up, yet he still caught the faint trace of her scent. Vanilla with a hint of warm cinnamon. Ava set the folder down and said lightly, half joking, half serious, I get the feeling you won't read them. You strike me as someone who doesn't need paperwork. Just one look at a person, and you already know what's right or wrong. He raised his head, eyes darkening. You talk as if you've known me for a long time, Miss Collins. It's just a feeling. I can read that from your eyes. He tilted his head, a shadow of a smile flickering across his lips. Then here's some advice. Don't try to read my eyes. They tend to keep people up at night. Ava's cheeks flushed crimson. She mumbled something incoherent and backed out of the room. Damien exhaled quietly, realizing he'd lost focus for the first time in years, a rare and dangerous thing. That afternoon in the elevator heading to the basement, Ava was on the phone with her best friend, her voice cheerful and light. No, I'm not dating anyone. Don't worry, baby, I'm fine. The elevator doors slid open, just as a deep voice spoke behind her. I don't think baby is an appropriate term for the workplace, Miss Collins. Ava spun around. Damien was standing right behind her, gray eyes gleaming with that cool, unshakable composure. Oh my God, she stammered. I wasn't talking to you. I was on the phone. Really? He stepped closer. Just a few inches now separated them. The air seemed to vanish. The overhead lights reflected off his sharp, impossibly beautiful features, and Ava forgot how to breathe. If you're going to call me that, he said quietly, voice low and rough, at least look me in the eye when you do. Ava froze. She didn't know whether to laugh or run. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly she feared the elevator could hear it too. I didn't mean it that way. I know. His gaze softened, but only slightly. Still, sometimes the things we say by accident are more honest than the things we try to hide. Ava couldn't answer. She could only breathe and pray her knees wouldn't give out. When the elevator stopped on the first floor, she rushed out. But before the doors closed, his voice followed her. Low, commanding, impossible to ignore. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Don't be late. I don't like waiting, baby. The doors shut. Ava stood in the lobby, face burning, torn between mortification and something far more dangerous. Part of her wanted to scream. The other part knew her heart was racing too fast to deny it. He was getting under her skin. Back in his office, Damien sat at his desk, twirling a pen between his fingers. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, one he didn't even realize he was wearing. Lucas walked in with a file. "Mr. Blackwood, the contract from Morgan and Feldstein." "Leave it." Lucas blinked. "Are you smiling?" Damien looked up, eyes instantly cold again. "I smile when I choose to, Lucas. Not when someone tells me to." Lucas left, shaking his head in disbelief. The man who hadn't smiled in 3 years had just done so, because of a secretary. That evening, when Ava got home, she opened her phone and saw an email from Blackwood Group. Subject: New assignment. Direct supervision. She clicked it open, and her heart nearly stopped. From Damien Blackwood. Message: "Starting tomorrow, you'll work directly with me. Be prepared." DB Ava froze, then burst into nervous laughter, covering her face with her hands. "Oh my God, I joked with my boss, and now I have to work right next to him." But beneath that laugh was something else, something that felt like a spark, a strange mix of fear and excitement. Elsewhere in the city, Damien stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of red wine in hand. Below him, Manhattan pulsed with light, a living bloodstream that never slept. He thought of those warm brown eyes, that unguarded voice, and that smile that somehow thawed the man he thought he'd buried years ago. "Baby," he murmured with a quiet laugh, "you've awakened something I thought was long dead." The wind swept past, carrying the bitter scent of wine, and Damien knew it was already too late to turn back. It was late. The headquarters of Blackwood Group lay silent, like a massive ship asleep in the middle of the city. The streetlights outside cast faint golden streaks through the tall glass windows, spilling across the marble floor. Ava was still there. In front of her was a mountain of documents, rows of figures and charts that stretched like a maze. She had planned to leave 30 minutes ago, but then she noticed a small error in the profit report, and she knew that if Damien saw it tomorrow, he'd lose his temper. She took off her glasses, rubbed her temples, and muttered, "Just a few more lines. Then I can go home." Behind her, the glass door to the conference room opened. Footsteps echoed, steady, deep, familiar enough to make her heartbeat stumble. Damien Blackwood. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, his tie loosened, and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms and a silver watch glinting under the warm light. He looked tired, but still carried that quiet authority that made people instinctively step back. "Why are you still here?" His voice was low, slightly hoarse from hours of meetings. Ava looked up, smiling wearily but brightly. "Because if one line is wrong, you'll go ballistic." He stopped, a beat of silence, then he laughed, quietly, deeply but genuinely. Ava was so shocked she nearly dropped her pen. "Wait, did you just laugh?" "Not sure." "That's fine. I'll take it as a yes." He braced one hand on the desk, leaning over to glance at the file she was fixing. The desk lamp threw light across half his face, tired. Yes, but strikingly handsome. So much so that she had to look away. "You can go home," he said. "I don't require overtime." "I know, but I hate leaving things unfinished. It's like walking away from a song before it hits the final note." He raised an eyebrow. "You're comparing financial reports to music now? Everything has rhythm if you bother to listen." Damien didn't reply. He just looked at her, longer than he should have. And for the first time, Ava saw something in his eyes besides power and control. Something that looked a lot like loneliness. The silence deepened. The city lights outside dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of the office lamp. Ava stood and walked to the water dispenser. "I brought cocoa powder. Want some?" "Cocoa?" His brow furrowed as if she'd spoken an alien word. "Yes, no coffee, no caffeine, just warmth. You know, the thing you're missing." "I'm not missing anything. You're missing sleep, and faith, and someone who makes you laugh." Damien turned his head toward her. She was holding 2 porcelain mugs, one extended toward him, her lips curved in that light, effortless smile that somehow lit up the whole room. He accepted the cup and took a sip, Sweet, gentle, with a faint bitterness at the end. He didn't like sweet things, but this, oddly enough, made him feel calm. I thought I was talking to a temporary assistant, he murmured, and I thought I was talking to a human being, not Wall Street's ice legend. He paused, then laughed again. A short, real, slightly rough sound, the kind that made Ava's heart skip a beat. You should laugh more, she said softly. It doesn't make you weak. Damien stayed silent. His eyes lingered on her face, the smooth skin, the neatly tied hair, the warm brown eyes glowing under the soft light. An ordinary woman, nothing glamorous, yet she somehow had the power to pull him out of the cold. His heart shifted a beat off rhythm. He set the cup down and took a step toward her. You talk like you know me. Not completely, but I'd guess you're very lonely. Damien stopped. His breath brushed the small space between them. You guessed wrong. Really? Ava tilted her head, eyes clear and steady. Then why do you look like you've forgotten what happiness feels like whenever I talk about it? A brief silence. Her words slid right through the walls he'd spent years building. Go home, Miss Collins, he said quietly, voice dropping an octave. Before I start thinking you're trying to breach my defenses. She smiled, gathering her papers. I didn't mean to. I know, but you're doing a very good job. Ava glanced at him one last time before heading to the door. In the golden light, his shadow stretched across the wall, alone, weary, but strangely softer than before. Good night, Damien, she whispered. He replied almost under his breath. Good night, Ava. The door clicked shut. Damien remained there staring at the cup of cocoa still steaming on his desk. A faint, wistful smile crossed his lips. Laughing doesn't make you weak, he repeated quietly. But you, Ava Collins, you might just make me forget how to protect myself. The night drifted on, and in that glass tower high above the city, a man who thought his heart was frozen forever was beginning to melt. The rumor began with a single photo. A staff member on the 47th floor, maybe out of curiosity, maybe out of a craving for a little office drama, had taken a picture of Damien Blackwood leaning down to take a cup of cocoa from Ava Collins' hand late that night. The lighting was dim. The angle was slightly off, but it didn't matter. Those two looks, his cold, hers soft, were enough to spark a wildfire. Did you hear? CEO Blackwood has someone new. His temporary assistant, right? She looks pretty average. No, there's something different. He smiled at her. He actually smiled. By the next morning, when Ava walked into the office, the air had already changed. Whispers, hidden glances, a few half smirks. Every step she took seemed to echo against the quiet roar of gossip spreading like smoke. She didn't avoid it, didn't lower her head. She walked straight ahead, chin lifted, calm eyes, but inside, a quiet fire was burning. Late afternoon. Rain. Raindrops tapped against the glass like the ticking rhythm of an unresolved thought. Ava knocked on the CEO's door. Damien was signing papers, his pen moving with that decisive force that made every word look like a command. Come in. She stepped forward, placing the folder on his desk. The air between them felt heavy, charged. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Without looking up, Damien said in a low, steady voice, I know you've heard. I did, Ava replied evenly. I'll handle the media. You don't have to worry. She stood still for a moment, then took a step closer to his desk. I don't need you to protect me, Damien. The pen froze. He lifted his head, his storm gray eyes locking onto her face, seeing no fear, no shame. You're angry with me? No. She crossed her arms. I've been through worse than rumors. Poverty, hospitals, loss. A few whispers behind my back won't break me. He stared at her long enough for her to hear the rain against the glass behind him. The same woman who once tumbled onto him in the middle of the street now stood before him like a warrior. No shield, no excuses. A faint smile flickered across his lips. Barely there, but enough to warm the room. Ava took a deep breath, her voice soft yet steady. The one I'm worried about getting hurt isn't me. It's you. Damien frowned slightly, narrowing his eyes as if he hadn't heard her right. Me? You've got an empire to protect, a reputation to uphold, If this mess causes you trouble, I'll walk away. Silence. Only the sound of rain filled the room, steady and relentless. He set his pen down. When he looked up, something in his gaze had shifted. No longer power, but something uncertain. You're worried about me? Ava smiled faintly, a smile touched with sadness. I'm not foolish enough to think I matter that much to you. But I don't want anyone using me to hurt you. Damien stood, his chair creaking softly. He moved around the desk, each step deliberate, measured. Ava instinctively stepped back, but he stopped just one breath away. The faint scent of mint and coffee clung to him, mixing with the damp air from the rain outside. You said you're not important, he murmured, voice dropping low. Yet since this morning, you're the only person I can think about. Ava's breath hitched. Her pulse quickened. Don't say that unless you plan to prove it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Damien tilted his head, a small, genuine smile breaking through. Nothing cold, nothing calculated, but warm and disarmingly human. Maybe I'll have to prove it sooner than I plan. She turned to leave, but not before he caught the faint blush coloring her cheeks. And Damien, watching her go, felt something inside him slip, like the ground shifting beneath his feet. Not because of beauty, not because of defiance, but because of the quiet strength within her, the kind he, for all his power, had never possessed. His eyes fell on the old cocoa cup still sitting in the corner of his desk, now rimmed with a dry brown stain. A faint smile tugged at his lips again. Doesn't need protecting, he repeated softly. And yet, you make me want to protect you. And for the first time in years, Damien Blackwood realized the man who had always controlled everything, from markets to people, was losing control, not because of pressure, not because of fear, but because of a woman who saw him not as the world did, but as a man, simply human. Thursday evening, the city was drenched in the soft golden glow of autumn lights, just bright enough to make the streets of Manhattan look as if they were gilded in gold. Ava had just finished her shift when her phone rang. Unknown number, she murmured, answering it. Miss Collins. That low, husky voice made her stop right there on the sidewalk. Mr. Blackwood? I'm at your old cafe. Come here. She turned, and her heart skipped a beat. Across the street, inside Eden Cafe, where she used to work, Damien was sitting at the corner table by the window. His gray suit jacket was unbuttoned, his collar open. Gone was the usual armor of cold perfection. He looked almost human. Ava walked in, exchanged a quick smile with one of her former co-workers, then approached his table. You knew I used to work here? I have my ways, he said, voice low, eyes never leaving hers. I came to ask you to dinner. And before you ask, no, this isn't a business dinner. So a personal one? You could call it that. She gave him a small, amused smile. All right, but I'm choosing the place. An hour later, they sat in a small restaurant on Spring Street, not a luxury establishment, but a cozy one filled with candlelight and faint jazz music drifting through the air. Damien had never eaten in a place like this. He was used to private dining rooms, five-star meals, and wine worth more than most people's salaries. But as he watched Ava sitting across from him, head bent slightly over the menu, a few strands of her brown hair brushing her cheek, he realized there was nowhere else he'd rather be. Do you usually eat alone? Ava asked after the waiter left. Almost always. I don't believe that. Believe it. Having dinner with someone is a risk. It forces you to share. Sharing isn't dangerous, she said softly. Silence is what kills people. He went quiet for a long moment. Her words cut through him, clean and deep. Then he gave a faint, weary smile, eyes flickering toward the candle between them. I used to share, Ava. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything. Clara, my fiancée, was smart, beautiful, and ambitious. We were supposed to marry after I closed the biggest deal of my career. He paused, his voice dropped lower. Then one morning, she was gone. No note, no call. Later, I found out she'd become a partner at a rival firm. They got married. The price of her new life was equity in a company. Ava stayed silent. The candlelight cast his shadow on the wall, long, solitary. I don't blame her, Damien continued, his tone even but cold. I just learned something that day. Love doesn't exist in contracts, and without a binding clause, it can't be trusted. So you decided to trust contracts instead. Yes, contracts have terms, consequences, and laws to enforce them. Love doesn't. Ava looked at him, long, steady, unwavering. There was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. Not everyone leaves for money, Damien, she said gently. Some people leave because they're too hurt, because they think they're not enough, or because they're afraid of hurting the person they love. He looked up, meeting her gaze. His eyes were darker now, stripped bare. Are you talking about her or yourself? Ava smiled faintly and shook her head. I'm talking about people. We all have our fears. The difference is, you chose to freeze. I chose to keep smiling. Silence lingered between them as the jazz softened into a slower melody. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping lightly on the glass roof. Damien turned his wineglass slowly, his voice almost a whisper. Do you really think people can smile again after losing all faith? It's not easy, she said, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. But when you truly smile again, the world doesn't change. You do. Damien chuckled softly, a quiet, real sound, tinged with fatigue. You're a paradox, Ava Collins. Thank you. I've been told I'm very good at confusing people. No, you make me want to say things I forgot how to say. Ava blinked. And that scares you? Maybe. The waiter returned with their meals. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The air between them had softened, woven with fragile threads of something between the past and what might come next. When dinner ended, Damien rose and pulled out her chair. His hand brushed lightly against her back, a small touch but enough to make her heart stumble. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Damien opened an umbrella and held it over her. She looked up at him, half teasing, half sincere. I thought a man like you didn't like getting wet. A man like me doesn't like many things, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. But it seems I'm starting to change. She looked up, the light from a nearby sign glinting in his gray eyes. Still deep, still stormy, but calmer now, like a lake after the tempest. Call me baby again, he said softly, almost like a dare. I dare you. She laughed, her breath trembling. Are you sure? Absolutely. All right, baby. He leaned down. The kiss came as softly as the rain. Warm, slow, filled with all the emotions that had been simmering between them for days. It wasn't a possessive kiss, but one of rediscovery, of a man finding the part of himself he thought he'd lost forever. When they pulled apart, Damien's voice was husky, roughened by something real. You remind me that genuine feeling doesn't need any clauses to exist. Ava smiled, her hand tightening slightly on the umbrella handle. Good, because if love had clauses, I'm pretty sure I've already broken them all. They walked together beneath the rain. No words were spoken, but in that silence, both knew a new chapter had begun. One without signatures, one without contracts, one written entirely by the heart. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The Saturday morning rain had just cleared when Ava received a message. Only 11 words. Pack a bag. We're going to inspect the Coastal Project DB. She stared at the screen, her heart quickening for reasons she couldn't name. A coastal project. It sounded strictly professional. But with Damien Blackwood, the word business always carried a hidden layer underneath. The road to Long Island stretched between rows of red autumn trees. The salty wind from the sea mingled with the scent of pine and the cries of distant gulls. The black car stopped in front of a beachside villa, not one of ostentatious luxury, but a wide, white-painted wooden house with glass doors opening toward the shore. Damien stepped out first, wearing a simple white shirt, his hands tucked casually in his pockets. His eyes, softened by the sea light, seemed far gentler than usual. Ava stood on the porch, the wind teasing her hair, her eyes bright with wonder. It's beautiful, she said, pulling her suitcase behind her. I bought it last year, he replied, but I've never stayed longer than a night. Why not? Because there was never anyone who made me want to. Ava didn't respond. It was a simple sentence, yet something in his tone carried the hollow sound of loneliness. All afternoon, Damien barely spoke of work. He walked with her along the sand, pointing out where the future resort might rise, but the architectural plans were quickly forgotten. "Do you ever think about leaving New York?" he asked, his gaze tracing the horizon. "Only after I've fulfilled my dream." "What dream?" "To open a center for orphans and single mothers," she said, voice quiet but certain. "A place where they can learn, rebuild their faith, or simply have someone to listen." Damien turned to her, studying her face. "Because your mother was one of them?" Ava nodded lightly, her eyes glimmering, though her voice stayed steady. "My mom raised me alone. She worked every job she could, from waitress to cleaner. I grew up between her size and her strength. I just don't want women like her to live their whole lives without knowing they're worthy of love." He said nothing. The wind carried the scent of salt and something heavier. Respect. "You're the first person who's made me want to believe in something better than a contract," he said softly. Ava looked up. The sunset brushed gold across her brown eyes. "And you're the first man who's made me realize not everyone cold is heartless." That night they cooked together, something no one would have believed if they knew Damien Blackwood. He chopped vegetables, she stirred soup, he spilled salt, she laughed until tears came. In the warm glow of the wooden kitchen, their laughter mingled with the whisper of waves outside. "You know," Ava said, "the first time I saw you smile, I thought I was hallucinating." "I thought so too," he admitted with a real smile. "I can't remember the last time I truly did." "Do you remember now?" "Maybe. Right now." The air between them softened. Ava set down her bowl, meeting his eyes across the counter. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of things words could never reach. Damien stepped closer. "You make me forget that I never believed in this." "In what?" "The feeling of wanting someone to stay." She smiled faintly. "Then don't forget." He leaned in, his breath brushing against the rhythm of her heartbeat. The kiss that followed was nothing like the one in the rain. It wasn't sudden or uncertain. It was discovery, tender and real, as if the world had quietly dissolved around them. Later, with the lights off, only moonlight streamed through the curtains, painting silver across their skin. Damien's arm rested around her waist, his breath warm against her shoulder. Ava lay still, her head against his chest, the rise and fall of it the safest place she'd ever known. "Do you think you made mistakes?" she whispered. "Believing that love was a transaction," he said, voice rough but lighter than it had ever been. "And now? Now I think you're the only exception I ever want to make." She let out a soft laugh, her fingertip tracing idle lines along his skin. "Then I'll write that down, just in case you forget." "I won't forget, Ava." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I've never remembered anything as clearly as this." Outside, the waves rolled steadily against the shore. The night was deep and calm, like a dream. And inside that seaside house, a man who once believed only in contracts was learning the language of emotion, beginning with a kiss and ending with the quiet confession of a heart finally willing to open. Monday morning. The atmosphere at Blackwood Group felt lighter than usual, at least until Ava walked in. She was still smiling, carrying the quiet glow of a weekend by the sea, when the whole office seemed to freeze. People turned to look at her, some curious, others almost pitying. A few whispered behind their hands, only to fall silent as she passed. She didn't understand what was happening until she reached the lobby screen. Across the business news channel ran the headline in bold letters: "Clara Westwood, former fiancée of billionaire Damien Blackwood, returns to New York," followed by a quote that sent a chill through Ava's chest. "He once promised he'd wait for me, no matter how long it took." Ava stood still, her breath caught in her throat. On the screen was a woman in a white dress, golden waves of hair, a perfect face framed by elegance. Clara smiled softly at the reporters, eyes glistening as if reliving some tragic love story. "I don't blame Damien," she said tenderly. "He loved me deeply once. I believe deep down he still does." A chime broke the silence. Ava's phone. A new article was spreading fast. "Blackwood's new woman, The secretary who replaced a love once admired. Her heart sank. She didn't need to read more. The narrative was obvious. The powerful man tempted by the young assistant. The office door opened. Damien stepped in fresh from a meeting, his expression carved in stone. Tie loosened, storm gray eyes dark and heavy. "Ava!" She stood, cutting him off before he could say another word. "I saw the news. Don't believe what they're saying. She said you once promised to wait for her." Her voice was calm but strained. "Is that true?" He went silent. Only a second, but it was enough. "At the time, I didn't trust anyone," he finally said quietly. Clara left without a word. "I said those things while trying to hold on to something already dead. But you never buried it, did you?" "I tried, until you came." "Tried," she repeated, her tone sharpening, "but never let go." He took a step closer, voice dropping low and rough. "Are you jealous?" "No." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "I just realized I'm a replacement. Someone filling a space she left behind." "Ava, no, listen to me." She stepped back, her voice cracking. "I believed you were different. That's what we had, and it wasn't halfway. But looking at you now, you still love her. You just don't want to admit it." He grabbed her hand, holding tight. "You're wrong. I don't love Clara. I just owe her a memory." "Then let it sleep, Damien. Don't make me the one who wakes it for you." Silence. She gently pulled her hand from his, every movement deliberate, weighted with finality. "If you need to protect your reputation, I'll leave. I don't want to be the reason anyone doubts you. I don't care what people say." "But I do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not because I'm afraid, because I know if I stay, you'll always be torn between the past and the present." He started to move toward her, but her gaze stopped him cold. It was steady, sad, unshakable. "Ava, don't go." "I have to." Her lips trembled, but her voice didn't. "Not because I'm weak, but because I won't be the woman standing between two people who once loved each other." She turned and walked toward the door, each step echoing through the suffocating stillness. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, growing fainter and fainter, until Damien was left standing alone, frozen like a statue. When the door closed, Damien sank into his chair, pressing his hand to his forehead. Rain began to fall outside, once a sound that calmed him, now only a reminder of loss. His phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. "The press wants a statement about Clara. Should I arrange an interview?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his gallery and stared at a photo he'd saved. Ava, laughing by the sea, her head tilted, hair caught in the wind. That unguarded smile, that honesty. He stared until his own reflection appeared over the image, and in that reflection, he saw the truth he'd been avoiding. Yes, he had loved Clara, but he had never trusted her. With Ava, it was different. He trusted her first. Then he fell in love. Outside, the media frenzy raged on. Online comments poured in like a storm. "She's just another gold-digging assistant. Clara was the real one. Blackwood can't love anyone else." Damien turned off the screen. He looked out at the rain-blurred skyline, the same gray city where they'd first met, when she tackled him in the crowd and accidentally called him baby. That day he'd laughed, for the first time in years. Now all he wanted was to hear her voice again. But it was too late. Clara had returned, Ava was gone, and Damien Blackwood, the man who once believed he controlled everything, finally understood that the worst kind of loss isn't what slips from your hands. It's the one you didn't have the courage to hold on to. The first winter rain fell over Manhattan like the sky's fury unleashed. Sheets of water lashed against glass towers, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. Inside Damien Blackwood's penthouse, everything was in disarray. Papers scattered across the desk, his phone vibrating nonstop. Amid the chaos lay a single photograph. Ava laughing beside a cup of cocoa on their seaside trip. He'd been staring at it for hours. Every time he reached for his phone to call her, he stopped. Because for the first time in his life, Damien Blackwood was afraid, not to lose his reputation, but of hearing the ring and no one answering. Ava, meanwhile, had left New York at dawn. She sat by the train window on her way to the small town where her mother lived. Cold wind pressed against the glass, fogging it with each breath. Outside, the world slipped by in gray and white, like an old film. Her mother opened the door before Ava even knocked, pulling her into a hug without a single question. "You've lost weight." "I'm fine, Mom." But Ava knew she wasn't. She lied so her mother wouldn't worry. That night she lay in her childhood bed, listening to the rain drumming on the tin roof. Damien's face flickered in every shadow. The way he looked at her, the warmth of his rare laughter, the way his voice dropped when he said her name. She tried to erase him, but the harder she tried, the clearer he became. Like the sea, the more you resist the waves, the harder they crash back. Back in the city, Damien stepped out of his garage as the downpour turned violent. "Mr. Blackwood," Lucas called after him, sprinting across the rain-slick concrete. "Don't drive in this weather." "I have to find her," Damien rasped. "I've already let her go too far." The black car shot into the storm, slicing through the darkness like an arrow. He didn't know where she was. He only knew that if he didn't find her tonight, he might never breathe again. The rain grew heavier. The roads were slick. Headlights fractured through the flood. A single slip of the tires, a scream of metal. Then silence. Ava woke suddenly in the middle of the night. Her phone was vibrating. Lucas's name flashed on the screen. "Miss Collins?" His voice was trembling. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Blackwood's been in an accident. He's at St. John's Hospital." The blood drained from her face. She gripped the phone, her voice barely a whisper. Is he all right?" "He's unconscious, but he's holding something in his hand. No one's been able to pry it open." She didn't hear the rest. Ava threw on her coat and ran out into the storm, catching the first train back to the city. By the time she reached the hospital, the rain hadn't stopped. The air smelled of antiseptic, cold metal, and fear. Lucas was waiting in the lobby, his face drawn and pale. "He's in recovery," he said quietly. "Broken ribs, mild head trauma, but he hasn't woken up yet." Ava didn't answer. She just walked past him, straight to the room. Through the glass door, she saw Damien lying pale and still against white sheets, his arm bandaged, dried blood marking his skin. And just as Lucas had said, his right hand was clenched around something. She stepped closer, her breath catching when she saw it. A photo. Her photo. Crushed. Wrinkled, but still showing her smile, her fingers curled around that cup of cocoa. Ava sank into the chair beside him and took his hand. "Damien." His hand was cold but still gripping tightly. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can you hear me? You're not allowed to leave me. Do you understand?" Tears spilled onto his skin. She didn't know when she started crying, only that every wall inside her, every hurt and every ounce of pride, melted away right there beside his bed. Then his lips moved. A sound, barely a breath, escaped him. "Don't leave me, baby." Ava's sob broke into a laugh through her tears as she squeezed his hand. "No," she whispered fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." She lowered her forehead to his hand, her tears mingling with the rhythm of the rain outside. The doctor opened the door quietly, about to speak, but Lucas shook his head, signaling him to stay silent. They stood there watching in stillness as the girl who once chased life with a smile now held the hand of a man once worshipped by the world. A man who, for the first time, looked fragile. And in that quiet hospital room, the storm outside softened as if even the sky was finally willing to let them breathe. 3 days after the accident, Damien Blackwood finally woke up. The hospital room was bright and sterile, the faint smell of antiseptic still in the air. But the early morning sunlight filtering through the window was softer now, warmer somehow. Ava was asleep in the chair beside his bed, knees pulled to her chest, head resting against her arms. Her hair was messy, her eyes heavy with exhaustion even in sleep, but her hand still held his tightly. Damien looked at her and smiled faintly. He never imagined he'd wake to this sight, the woman who'd turned his world upside down, still here, small but unyielding, refusing to leave even when everything else had fallen apart. "Ava!" His voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. She stirred, then gasped awake. The moment their eyes met, tears welled up instantly. "You're awake." "I thought you'd leave again," he murmured. "I tried," she admitted softly, brushing her eyes. "But then you decided to drive through a storm just to find me. So I had to come back to yell at you." He chuckled, a real laugh this time, weak but full of life. "Yell at me all you want, as long as you're still here." Her lips trembled. She couldn't speak. Damien reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "Ava, there are things I never said, and if I hadn't woken up that night, I was afraid I'd take them with me." "Don't say that. Listen." He stopped her, eyes steady but soft. He drew in a breath and spoke slowly, carefully, as though each word mattered. "Clara isn't someone I still love. She's just a wound I used to be afraid to touch. But you—" He paused, brushing his thumb across her fingers. "You're the cure. The reason I want to be a better man is for myself." Ava froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but this time, not from pain. "You lie too beautifully," she whispered through a shaky smile. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "I just learned to tell the truth later than most." Damien tried to sit up. She reached to stop him, but he shook his head. He opened the drawer beside the bed, took out a small envelope, and placed it in her hands. "This is what I meant to give you before the accident." Ava opened it. Inside was a printed document, the header reading, "Blackwood Foundation," and beneath it, bold letters that made her breath hitch. "Full sponsorship for Ava's Haven, a center for orphans and single mothers." Her voice trembled. "When did you do this?" "The night you left," he replied quietly. "I realized that if I didn't start building something that mattered, I'd just be another name tied to power. You told me I lacked faith, that I'd forgotten how to smile. Now I have both." Ava burst into tears, laughing through them. "Why do you always make me cry when I should be smiling?" "Because I still don't know any other way to make you believe I mean it," Damien said with a soft grin, the wound on his lip reopening slightly. She cupped his face with trembling hands. "Stop trying so hard. You nearly died because of me." "No," he whispered. "I lived because of you." And in that moment, Ava leaned down and kissed his forehead. It was a small kiss, but it carried everything she'd never said, every emotion she'd buried deep. "Thank you, Damien," she murmured. "Not for the foundation, but for believing again." "And I won't stop believing," he promised. A few weeks later, when Damien was discharged, the headlines returned. But this time, they weren't about scandal. Across the front page was a photo of him and Ava standing side by side, smiling as they cut the ribbon at the opening of Ava's Haven, the first center for orphans and single mothers in the Lower East Side. She wore a simple white dress, he in a charcoal gray suit. Their eyes met across the crowd of journalists and applause, and no words were needed. After the ceremony, Damien took her hand and led her out to the courtyard, where the afternoon sunlight spilled over freshly painted cream-colored walls. Children laughed. Women lined up to receive care packages. Ava looked around, her voice trembling. "I never thought I'd live to see this dream come true." Damien placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I wanted to see your light reach the places I once ignored." She turned to him, laughing through her tears. "You're becoming dangerously charming, you know that? Dangerous is if you ever try to leave me again." "I won't," she said softly. "Not this time." He smiled. Not the polished, powerful smile of a CEO, but the quiet, peaceful smile of a man who had finally found a reason to live differently. As dusk settled, Ava stood on the balcony of the new center, watching the sunset glint across the city glass. Damien came up behind her, draping his coat over her shoulders and entwining his fingers with hers. "The world out there is still noisy," she whispered. "Then we'll stay quiet," he said. "And the past?" "It's healed," he murmured. "Because of you." Ava looked up at him, her smile soft as the fading light. "I'm not a miracle, Damien." "No," he replied, pressing his forehead to hers. "You're the reason miracles exist." He kissed her, slow and tender, as the laughter of children echoed below, and the last light of day bathed them in gold. All the pain, the mistakes, the broken pieces, they no longer mattered. Only two souls remained, once lost, now found again, not by contracts or promises, but by hearts that had finally learned how to believe. 1 year later, May's sunlight spilled like honey over the cream-colored walls of the new building, where silver letters gleamed softly in the breeze. Horizon Home. Inside, the main hall was full of reporters, investors, social workers, and dozens of small, bright-eyed faces looking around in awe. Children, single mothers, people who had once walked through the wreckage of their lives and now stood in a place built on hope. On stage, Ava Collins stood in a pale blue dress, her voice calm and warm, carrying through the air like a gentle wind that touched every heart. A year ago, this was only a drawing on paper. Today, it's a home for hundreds of souls, a place where dreams can be rewritten, where every child is known by name, not by circumstance. She paused, smiling at the crowd. I used to think the past was a burden, but I've learned something. None of us can change the past, but we can give someone else a new beginning. From the front row, Damian Blackwood watched her quietly. No longer the sharp, untouchable CEO who commanded billion-dollar deals, just a man looking at the woman who had turned his life into something human again. The light caught his gray eyes, and for once they looked warm. When Ava bowed, the applause thundered through the hall. A small group of children ran up on stage, wrapping their arms around her legs and giggling. "Miss Ava, you promised to teach us how to bake. And tell us stories too." Ava laughed, kneeling down to hug them, her tears glinting like sunlight. And then through the crowd's soft murmurs, Damien stepped onto the stage. He held a bouquet in his hands, not of roses but wild daisies, the flowers she once called the blossoms of simple hope. The applause quieted. Ava turned, startled. Damien approached her, smiling gently. He handed her the bouquet and leaned close to whisper, "You healed this entire world, starting with me." Ava blinked back tears, smiling through them. "You're exaggerating, Damien." "No," he said softly. "You turned pain into light. You did what I never thought I'd be brave enough to do." For a moment, the hall went utterly still. No one could hear their words, but everyone could see the truth in his eyes. The once feared, once distant man now stood beside her, gaze full of love. Ava turned back to the microphone, her hand still trembling slightly. "And the person I need to thank," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is the one who believed in this project when it was still just a dream. Thank you, Damian Blackwood, for teaching me that no road is too cold if someone walks beside you." Applause rose again, long and bright as waves. Damian reached for her hand, quietly, privately, just enough for her to feel his warmth and know it was real. After the ceremony, they stepped into the garden behind the center. Children were laughing, running across the grass. The small flower beds Ava had planted herself were now in full bloom. "You did it," Damian said softly. "No," she corrected, tilting her head with a smile. "We did it." He looked at her for a long moment. The wind brushed her hair back, carrying with it the scent of sunshine and second chances. "When I met you," he murmured, "you ran into me on the street and called me baby. I thought it was an accident." Ava laughed, the sound light and free. "It was, but it turned out to be a pretty good one." "Not just good," he said, squeezing her hand. "It changed everything." They stood in silence, the laughter of children echoing faintly in the distance, blending with the soft sound of music from the speakers. Ava rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think healing happened in silence," she whispered. "But now I know. It happens when someone gives you the courage to face your pain." Damien smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You taught me that love doesn't need contracts, just faith." She lifted her face, her eyes luminous. "And I believe in you." By sunset, they stood together before the golden light reflecting off the sign, Horizon Home. The letters glowed, alive with the color of new beginnings. Damien turned to her, his fingers tightening gently around hers. "You know, Ava, I've signed hundreds of contracts in my life, but this is the only one I never want to end." She laughed, eyes shimmering. "Good, because this one doesn't have an expiration date." He smiled, leaning down to kiss her, a tender, unhurried kiss beneath the fading sunlight. Behind them, children's laughter filled the air, and the light wrapped around them both like a promise. On the front wall of the center, a small brass plaque gleamed with the words, To those who still believe in second chances, love can rebuild everything. 1 year later, spring had unfolded across New York, painting the streets in sunlight and cherry blossoms. Petals drifted through the air like soft pink rain outside the glass facade of Horizon Home, where laughter of children echoed through the courtyard below. On the second floor, Ava Collins stood by her office window, a new stack of sponsorship proposals in her hands. Her eyes softened as she watched a group of kids chasing each other in the yard. Children who once had nowhere to belong, now laughing freely under the sun. The door opened. Damian Blackwood stepped in, still the sharp, elegant figure in a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes now carried a warmth that never used to be there. "Everything all right, Mrs. Collins?" he asked, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Ava laughed, shaking her head. "Are you trying to change my last name before I even say yes?" "I feel like I've waited long enough," he replied, walking toward her. Then he handed her a small envelope. Simple, refined, unmistakably him. Inside was a plane ticket. "To Paris?" She blinked. He nodded. "There's a charity conference." And I thought, it might be the perfect place to do something I should have done long ago. Paris, evening on the Seine. The night air carried the scent of warm bread and red wine. Lanterns shimmered across the bridges, their reflections trembling on the surface of the river. Ava stood at the railing, wrapped in a light coat, her hair brushing the wind. Behind her, Damian approached, a small box in his hand. "Ava," he said quietly, and for the first time in years there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. The same man who once made the entire real estate world bow to him. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured, smiling. "We already have everything we need." "No," he said softly, stepping closer. "Not everything. I've had power, a company, a legacy, but I've never had forever." He opened the box. Inside lay a platinum ring, simple and luminous. Engraved on the inner band were two words: "Baby, forever." "You know," he began, voice low, his smoky gray eyes glinting beneath the Paris lights, "the first time you accidentally called me baby, I thought it was just a mistake. But now it's the one thing I want to hear, for the rest of my life." Ava laughed through her tears. "Are you sure? I talk a lot, you know." "I've developed a habit of surviving you," he teased. Then right there on the bridge, with violins playing faintly from somewhere downstream, he sank to one knee. "Ava Collins," he said, smiling up at her, "will you do the most reckless thing imaginable? Become Mrs. Blackwood?" She laughed, tears spilling freely, and nodded without hesitation. "Yes, but you should know, I'm not signing a contract for this." "Goody," he said, standing and pulling her close, "because this is the only deal I never want to end." Their kiss melted into the Paris night as the Seine shimmered below like it was keeping their secret. 2 months later, the wedding. Their wedding was held in the garden behind Horizon Home. No extravagance, no diamonds, just sunlight, white flowers, and the people whose lives they had touched. Ava wore a simple ivory dress, the breeze lifting her veil. Damian waited at the altar, his expression softening as she walked toward him, each step erasing the distance that had once kept them apart. Children giggled from the front row. "Miss Ava looks like a princess, and Mr. Damian looks like a funny prince." Laughter rippled through the guests. Ava reached him, eyes bright with emotion. "You look better when you smile," she whispered. "I only know how to smile when you're near," he replied. Then under the golden light of late afternoon, they exchanged vows. "I once thought love was just an illusion," Damian said, "but you taught me that miracles don't need reasons." The word baby started as a mistake and turned out to be destiny. Ava's voice trembled when she answered, "And I once thought I stumbled into your life by accident, but maybe God planned for me to fall into the right arms." They exchanged rings. Applause and laughter mingled with the wind. Damian bent to kiss her, a soft, certain kiss that felt like a new beginning. 1 year later, morning in their kitchen, sunlight poured through the window. The smell of cocoa drifted across the small kitchen. Ava stood at the counter wearing one of Damian's shirts, her hair tied loosely. He sat at the table barefoot, reading the morning paper. On the high chair between them, a baby girl, 8 months old, laughed and banged a spoon against the tray. Her name was Clara Hope Blackwood. Clara for forgiveness, hope for the promise that love can rise again. Damien looked up from his paper, his eyes soft. "Hey, baby." Ava turned, smiling. "You know, that day I called you baby by accident. I had no idea I was getting it right." He stood, wrapping his arms around her waist. "And I still haven't planned on letting you go." She chuckled, leaning into his chest. "Don't you dare, Mr. Blackwood." He kissed her neck, the kiss of a man who had once lost everything and learned how to love without fear. Clara squealed with laughter, knocking over the cup of cocoa. It spilled down Damien's shirt. Ava gasped and hurried to wipe it off, while Damien just laughed, his deep voice echoing through the cozy kitchen. "Looks like we've just added another member to our lifetime contract." "A contract with no clauses," Ava said, grinning, "and no expiration date." They laughed, and for a moment, everything was perfect. The sunlight, the warmth, the laughter of their daughter, and the love that began with one wrong word, but ended with forever.